Thanks, Chris. Actually, Chris, we ignored you for a long time, I think, with regards to that advice. No, it was all joking aside. It was at our event, feedback from that. Originally, it was split into two. The problem was, because it's kind of made up of a number of moving parts, customers would say, well, I really want just this bit and not the rest of it. So it makes sense to break it into 9 elements. Now, just going to start with working through those. So one of the first ones was warehouse replenishment. And the idea is you can just pick and choose the ones that are relevant. So what warehouse replenishment would be, so for those of you who perhaps you've got multiple remote warehouses and you need to replenish them, so it could be van stock, for example, or consignment where it's your stock held at other warehouses. It could even be, a series of retail stores, and you just need to define a list of where you're below the minimum and then create that transfer and then be able to move that across. So there's utilities in there. Material planning, so predominantly coming from the manufacturing world originally, we put it into distribution because there are those who, a lot of organisations, and really it's probably one of the most popular elements of this, who want to look at that bigger picture of what purchase orders you need to place by and when, giving you warnings as well, based on all of the stock insights that you've got within the system. And that will be one which I'll be looking at today. Reserves and call-offs. So the idea there is using sort of contracts and manage commitment to purchasing and tracking the progress. So you might have heard of things like sort of blanket orders, those sorts of things. Future sales, we'll touch on this one as well. So what we often get is, how can you help us with forecasting what we need to order? Well, actually, we do that backwards. What I mean by that is looking at historical sales, well, usage actually, which is both sales, it could be internal issues, it could be anything where you've consumed stock. Using a metric there to give you suggestions to amend your minimum stock levels. You can update those en masse, at which time when you run material planning, and it's using that as the barometer as to what level we need to get the stock back up to. Of course, then you should have hopefully enough stock coverage based on those trends. Again, we'll touch on that today. Purchase order management, so a series of utilities in there that all around the PO process. So, for example, quantity breaks for suppliers, as we can see in there. Landed costs, so for those of you who are buying in from historically it would be the Far East, but of course now with the Brexit element, buying in from the EU as well. So Sage has got its own landed costs, but often that's not granular enough, so enabling you to split it out into 6 or up to 6 nominals. Pre-allocations is one which we get a lot of inquiries around. So being able to pre-allocate from a sales order to stock that's not been received yet. So what purchase orders we got? So essentially ring fencing that stock. So we promise the customer, as soon as that's received, it then automatically gets allocated as it hits Sage to the appropriate order, but also being able to manage those as well. Container management, that's become more and more popular, certainly over the last 6 months. So it's we've got some utilities on the purchase orders for being able to track and tracking progress on the PO, but where you're putting multiple orders or order lines actually into a container, being able to track that where that is, that's a perfect utility for that, as well as being able to update then if there's a delay, the appropriate dates. And again, we'll show you that one today. Stock matrix, quite focused really. It was designed predominantly for a client who they work in the footwear industry. So what they would need to do is create stock items, so a new line where, of course, you've got the different sizes, you might have different widths, you've got different colors for a product, so creating the product codes. But of course, as we're putting orders on, an easy way with that matrix to then be able to take those orders. And then the final one is on the sales order management side. So some utilities to enhance as you put on a sales order. One of my favorites is the telesales. So often we hear we like to use the rapid order, but it doesn't give us quite the level of information that we require. So again, enabling you to do that from the full order right the way through to back orders, so being able to manage your back orders. So sales orders where you've allocated stock but not yet dispatched, but also sales orders that you've not yet allocated stock. And again, we'll touch on as many of those as possible as we go through today. So let's move on to the demonstration and back into Sage. Now, what I've actually been doing whilst I've been talking is I've run material planning in the background, so you don't have to sit through that, and I will come back to that in just a moment. So as we go through, it's all installed in Sage, and you'll have a Sicon distribution, and it's broken down into the modules. So of course, you only need to purchase the appropriate ones. So I'm actually going to start in future sales. So this, again, as I mentioned before, was the forecasting. There's actually two elements. There is a new forward one, which I'll come on to shortly. But in terms of calculating your minimum stock levels, let me just run this for a single product group for the moment. As I display this, what the system's doing is running through all of the stock items at all of the locations, so the warehouse locations. It's looking at the current minimum level. It's looking at the last rolling 13 weeks of usage. As I mentioned, usage is sales, it could be internal issue, it could be consumption from a manufacturing, those sorts of things. And it's going to come back with suggestions. And really, you're looking for the extremities. Now, for those of you who are seasonal, well, that's great. What we can do is we can actually put a specific date range in there. So for example, if I was ordering now for Q2 of this year, I could put in the 1st of April 2020 through to the 30th of June 2020, and it would then give me the average monthly demand for all of those stock items within that given period. So what can we see on screen? First off, I'm going to sort by the percentage change. So for example, here we've got 119 free stock. Our current minimum is set to 50. If we have a look, we're actually not selling a lot at all. So it's 0. So the system's suggesting we change that to 0. So when we come to run material planning, obviously if you purchase both alongside each other, you're not stocking more than you require. If I flip this round, what we can also then see, for example, let's have a look at, which one should we do? Let's have a look at this one here. So currently we've got a minimum stock level of 0, but it's a sizable demand. And if I click on the link there, we've actually tweaked Sage's monthly trading figures as part of this to add some extra analysis. So first off, for sales, we've given a graphical representation. So it's great for your phasing to see, are there any spikes? Lost order analysis is an element which is part of the stock management, so enabling your sales team to record that we've lost a sale. Mostly the ones you'd use would be no stock or lead times, and that can then be pulled through into the calculation. But as I say, usage is very much what we're basing that on. And if I look across to the last 2 years, on that phasing, I can then start to see, well, actually, is it spikes? Is it the usual end of a quarter hockey stick, or is it, or is it just a one-off in terms of the suggestion? Now, the way that it's calculated the suggestion is based on this. So demand is usage plus lost orders. Working days in the month, we've set that as 21 in the background of the system. Of course, that can be changed. Gives us an average daily demand. The lead time from the preferred supplier is 5 days. We've set a 50% safety margin, and there's options to be able to override that on the stock item as well as the supplier as well. That gives us a stock coverage of 7.5 days. Multiplying that together with rounding gives us a minimum stock suggestion of 215, but it is purely a suggestion. We can change that information. What I can also do just within here as well is look at stock item balances, and we've enhanced Sage's screen here so we can start to see what's allocated on a purchase order. And this view is actually available in a number of them. So we've put this, so if you buy SOP management, you've got this view as well as if you buy POP management as well. So what you do is you tick the ones that you want to accept, perhaps after you've made some changes, and you update your minimum. And that's going to update against the stock items against the appropriate warehouse. Now, the other way of looking at this is looking forwards. So we added this in our most recent release, which was in November of last year, where if I pick a stock item, for example, so I'll go for our good old espresso machines, and I'll display, and I've said, show me that period, so the last 12 months, and it's for each of the warehouse locations, it's showing us the sales for that particular item across that period. Now, what we can do is we can generate, oh, sorry, I need to select all. I can generate our forecast, which drops it into here, and I can add a percentage forecast change. So if we're saying actually we think this product's going to grow by, 0.5% or whatever, that's going to adjust the numbers for us moving forward based on the appropriate period before. And if I save that, what it will do is it drops it then into material planning. So of course, that's where you would need both in order for it to be effective. In the forecasts, it will then drop those figures into here. And what the forecast from a material planning perspective is a way of including this into your material planning. So you've not yet got the order, but what we have done, again, just to add a bit of dynamics, is if I come into sales order processing and I go to put a new order on, and we'll pick, they'll do King Stanton. This pop-up and the next one is part of stock management. I'll touch on that shortly. If I go and add an item, so we've got an espresso machine. So we'll go into the customer wants 10 of those. As I save, it will pop up and say, oh, actually, you've got a forecast for that stock item. So do you want to reduce the balance of that forecast? So again, there's some dynamics in there as well to make this useful for you. So if we have a look at material planning, so what I've done, I've run that. Now we can see it took probably 2 minutes. I've got about 6,500 stock records. Of course, if you've got 3 million, that's going to take a lot longer than if you've got 3. Now you can see the steps it's gone through. Deletes the previous suggestion, takes a snapshot, and then works through the details. So in the first one you're going to see will be warnings. Now most of mine is in the past because it's demo data, but you will see things such as if a purchase order is overdue. You can see that there, and if we double click, it will load up our future stock movement screen, and this really underpins the whole of the system. So opening free stock, you might have more of that in stock, but if you've allocated it, we just essentially assume that you've obviously what you're doing with that. So we're looking at free stock, and in there I can see somewhere down here there's my purchase order coming in, and it should have been in last year, so massively overdue. You might have other things where a suggested purchase order for stock for this sales order may not arrive in time because of the lead time as well. So we're giving you some warnings. You might get some reschedule messages, very simple, in that you've got a purchase order that's linked to the sales order. We move the sales order out because the customer doesn't need it quite so soon. You might get a message to say that you can reschedule the PO. So if we come to suggested purchase orders, we've actually got 3 tabs here, depending on the fulfillment method. So if you've got your fulfillment method set to direct from supplier, you'd see those suggested purchase orders to place those there. Supplier via stock in this tab, and then from your PO. Earliest date you can place a PO would be today, but you might see some dates out into the future because it's looking out at that bigger picture, and you can choose when you want to place those. Lead time from the preferred supplier, and therefore requested date, which again we can change. All the stock item details, the quantity, which we can overwrite that it's suggesting, and which warehouse location. Information on your current stock, your supplier. So not only will it pull through the preferred supplier, it will list the other suppliers you might have set up against that stock item, but we also list the rest of the purchase ledger. So if you can nip round to a local supplier that will provide the item you wouldn't ordinarily buy from them, but because it's an emergency, it means you can generate a purchase order to them. The price, so if you're using list price, we'll pull that. If not, a live price from an open PO should be the most recent, last buying or average. We try to give you some logic. Again, we can override the pricing. We've then got the reasons. So if I just double click on a couple, so let's go for this minimum stock one just in the middle there. What we can see is we've got a minimum stock level of 10. We can order it in eaches and it's the same day delivery. Opening balance is 10. Because I've got manufacturing, we've actually got a works order that we'll need to consume those 4, so we would go down to 6. 6 is below 10, so the system's suggesting that we order 4 in just in time to, in this case, there's no warning because we're not running out of stock. Just going to suggest we order 4 to bring us back up to that minimum. If that's a load of rubbish and you've got permission, you can amend the stock item details, so I can make changes. You would have to rerun MRP for those to become effective. So that's all the information. As I say, it is a suggestion. Now, what you can do, there's a couple of options that we've recently added in. So the first one is I filter by my supplier. So that's great. It means that I can phone through. All of these are from Blackburn and I can work down the list. If I select the ones that I want to place, and I click on this button here, something we added in again at the end of November, what that will do is it will drop the suggested over to here. So it's going to give us a suggestion, lists all the lines, and this is great for customers who want to maximize that order. So the system's suggesting you need to buy X, Y, and Z, but actually to maximize it, we want to get as much in the lorry as possible. You can then add other stock item lines to this that weren't suggested. Also, with the quantity break, if you have the pot management piece with the quantities, if you have that set up and you've got quantity breaks, and you hover over the quantity, it will tell you if there are any quantity breaks. Perhaps you might want to order an extra 10 to make use of a better price, for example, and then you can create a purchase order. The other options you have is if you've got the WAP requisitions that we saw earlier, we can send this out to WAP to be approved. Now the argument will be, well, why? And absolutely, if the person purchasing, running this has got full autonomy, there's no need, but often you want that sense check, you want it signed off before, just to make sure that that sort of double check. So that's where if you've got the WAP, send it out as a requisition, goes through the approval routes, and then it will post and create the POs. Or you can simply tick the ones that you want to place, create purchase orders. Now, where it's from the same supplier, it will group them where it's the same delivery address. So in this case, I'll have 2 POs. I can change any of the details and click on create, and that's going to place my purchase orders en masse. So that's really the visibility there. It's great for both organizations where it's very fast moving, or those where you're placing containers and you've got longer 12, 14-week lead times. But the most important bit is you've got the human intervention. The system's based on logic, but there's no substitute for that experience of, really, we don't normally order that many, and it could well be somebody's just added an extra 0 as they've put an order on by mistake. So that then leads me quite nicely then onto the, if we come back into here, into container management. So if we come into container management, there's a couple of elements to it. So you've got the PO tracking inquiry and the container. So first things first, you can create your container sizes and the maximum volume and payload. Against each of your stock items, you can then set up the weight, the dimensions. It's not an exact science because, of course, it depends on how you're going to pack it, but it can give you an idea of how full your container is. You've then got tracking profiles. So I mentioned earlier, you can have tracking profiles for your POs as well as your containers. So underneath this module, you've got both. So for my POs, I've created one, say, from China. We've got up to 8 steps, and we're saying it takes 1 day for them to process it, 5 days then to manufacture. It's on the sea for 15 days, etc., etc. So 27 days worth of lead time. And we've got these pop statuses, which can then highlight where it is in terms from a color coding perspective. You've also got your container as well in terms of profile for that. So what's the difference? Well, first things first, if we come into our purchase orders, you'd use the PO tracking. If, for example, in my China profile, and let me pick these ones I'll do. With my China profile, it's 1 PO to a container. Then you don't need to worry. But what this gives about worrying about containers, because you can just use the tracking dates for the PO, because everything on the PO is in the same container. So we can enter a vessel name, the documents, any notes there. But what it's saying here is if we place that order, so if I say I'll place the order today, it won't be in until the delivery date, the 3rd of March. So that's the first bit. So you can set up that profile to see where you are. Now you get a call to say, yes, it's on the sea, but actually it's not been on the sea until the 12th. As you tab, you've now got a new delivery date. You can record your notes and the problems and confirm that as well. As you save it, it's then going to tell you to update. Do you want to update all of the lines? And of course, if we're running material planning, that's going to give us warnings if there's any impact. So that's at the PO level. Where container management comes in is if we're going to be mixing PO lines on a container. So you can create a brand new container, and we'll do the good old Blue Peter fashion. There's one I prepared earlier. There's your internal number, but you can put the actual container number for tracking. If you've got your stock item set up, that's where it's going to give you the maximum volume, and you can display that there, or you can just display the values, because often you want to see the cost of the container, perhaps for insurance purposes. But you can then start to add container lines. So you can find your suppliers, if I've got any POs from them, and I can tick and add those lines or a quantity of those lines. You could add a whole PO if you wanted to. So let me just clear that a second. Let me just find a PO. So yeah, you could add the lines from a PO. Essentially, you're mixing and matching. You then add your tracking profile. So what that means is if I update the actuals here and that impacts the delivery date, then when we say, yes, please update all the PO lines, it's going to update the associated POs. And of course, exactly the same thing there. I run MRP, and that's going to give me any warnings. But also from a reporting perspective, you're able to then start to track actually confirmed versus working days as well. And you've got attachments, so any documents that would be relevant for the containers. Okay, so that's containers, and that's MRP that we've gone to. Reserves and call-offs next. Now, this is for, you might have heard the term blanket orders, call-off orders. So we often get customers who say, the challenge we've got, and they might have used a material planning module before, is how do we've got a commitment with our supplier that we will place these orders, they'll give us a certain price, providing we order enough within a given period. Now, the problem is if you put them on as POs, which a lot will do, you run MRP is going to go, no, you've got enough stock. You might get the odd warning to say it's not going to arrive in time, but it's not going to give you any suggestions of when you need to place the POs because there's enough stock in the pipeline. And this is where the contracts come in. So you can create a purchase contract. MRP is not going to look at these, but what it's going to enable you to do is say, okay, with this supplier, give the contract a name and a reference, the date that that contract runs from and to. You've got your different warehouses there, the quantity, the buy price, and it will track, as you place your POs, it will track the remaining balance. So you can then report on what you've got left to order. You've got a history of your contract where you'll see all the PO numbers as well. So it's a way of being able to track that. You can print your contract off. Now, from the sales side, the opposite of that, and I just amend this one, exactly that. So your customer has agreed to buy a certain amount from you at a price. So you set up the contract, and we can see they've placed a PO at the a sales order at the moment for 10. So we've got the tracking history there. It's reduced my balance, so I can see there's 10 on order. But if you've got this price, as you put the order on, it will pop up and say, oh, there's a contract price. Do you want to use that as well? So it's a great way of being able to control that. Give visibility, of course, when you're reporting, because it's all in the same Sage database. Any reporting utilities you've got, you can get access to those tables, obviously providing it's a relevant information. Pre-allocations, well, I'm actually going to cover that off with SOP management very quickly. So I'm going to go back into my sales order processing. So with the SOP management, as we saw earlier, as I pick King Stanton Kitchens, if you've got customer notes, delivery addresses, and analysis codes. Now, I'm not for 1 minute wanting to offend any salespeople who may be on there, but I'm sure we've experienced those who any attention to admin or detail goes out the window when there's a carrot of a sale in front of them. So rather than them remembering afterwards to go to the appropriate tab here to pick the delivery address, we bring that to the forefront to say, right, what's the address that you're going to ship it to? Fill in your analysis codes. Are there any pertinent notes? Likewise, any orders that we've not yet dispatched, could I tag it to that? So in the traditional sense, you would come in, add your items. So if we go for our good old espresso machines again, and we say the customer wants 10 now, let's just pretend we haven't got any in stock. One of the first things you'll get will be this distribution button at the bottom there, where you can see the future stock movements. Says when my system wakes up, so I can see, have we got any purchase orders coming in? If we haven't, what's the earliest that I'm likely to get it? So that's number one. Second one within the distribution, my item balances. So actually, have we got any stock at the other warehouses that I could potentially send it out from? As well as previous sales orders, the customer saying, oh, I didn't pay that much. Well, yes, you did. I remember you bought it in, we can see you bought it in January, and that's the price you paid. So that's part number one. Second part, as we mentioned, is being able to record your lost orders. So this is where you pick the appropriate one. In the background of the system, you tell it which ones you want to include in that minimum stock calculation. And if I save that, I don't have to save the sales order. It just saves that line, which you can then later sign off in a screen to say, yes, we're happy for that to be included. You run your minimum, and of course, you then run your material planning, everything that we've just been through. The pre-allocations, this is the next bit. So we haven't got any stock. Have we got any purchase orders coming in? Yes, we have. I've got a PO coming in next week. Mr. Customer, it's going to come in on Tuesday. That means I could get it to you for Thursday. Would that be okay? Fantastic. I can save this and create a pre-allocation to that purchase order. And as I mentioned earlier, it means that when that's received, it will automatically allocate to that order. And the values here are the free values. So if there was 100 and we do 8 lots of pre-allocations, means that it's only going to be 20 free stock left. Now, the other buttons that you have are matrix, as we mentioned earlier. So if I pick my formal polo shirts, this is it. Once you've set up your stock, you can just say, oh, they want 4 of those, they want 3 of those, add them to the sales order. I can edit any prices. So I'll just say they're nice ones. So I do 50 and 60. Save that. And that's now added my lines to my order. Add historical lines will show stock items that this customer's bought from us before and the prices that they've paid based on what we've added on there. We can copy lines from a previously approved sales order. So not just the whole sales order, but individual lines, and add them to this if the customer says. And then, as I mentioned before, your telesales, so just being able to tap in, okay, what have we got? Within the stock management, the superseded items as well, discontinued items, and add the prices in and add them to the sales order. So it's some great utilities to speed up the onboarding. Now, let's cancel that. Sorry, let me just remove all the lines. I don't want to process that through. And whilst I'm doing that, there we go. 2 other screens, and then I will be finished. There's loads more I could touch on. First one is pre-allocations. So as I mentioned, there's a whole screen here where you can manage those pre-allocations. So I've got a lot of works orders and other modules, but being able to see those, create or edit the pre-allocations as well. So you're able to manage that centrally. By the way, material planning could be switched on to automatically create those pre-allocations for you based on the POs you suggest. And then from a stock management perspective, as I mentioned before, being able to manage stock back orders. I love this screen. So it's essentially what I can do is I've actually just displayed all of our allocations and allocate. But actually, if I filter that and say, got a customer desperate, an important customer, obviously all customers are important, but this one for the espresso machine, we haven't got enough stock. So these orders, actually, we could unallocate. Abbey Retail's there, they don't need it for another week or so. So I can unallocate, that frees up some stock, and then I can allocate. It's also a great screen for those who perhaps don't want to use the auto allocate, you want to be in control. So do your allocations from here and it will show you the free stock balance which goes down as you allocate. So all sits inside of Sage. There's lots in there. I would recommend, if you are interested, speak to Chris and the team, get a demonstration. Obviously, we can make it pertinent to yourselves. Have a look on the website. There's lots of information. Chris, are there any questions?
Yeah, just got a just a couple, Steve. So what we got? Yeah, an existing Sicon user, obviously spotted a couple of things that they don't currently have. Has just asked which version you're running. I'm guessing it's 20.1, is it?
It is, yeah. It's 20.1 at the moment, so it's the most recent. So there will be some bits in there potentially that were added. What I'd probably recommend, Chris, is we could just tee up a call, or if you let me know the customer's details, we can obviously look into that.
Yeah, no problem. Sales forecasts. Can we create bespoke sales forecasts for specific products? I.e., if we've got a specific supplier and we're about to do an order, can we create a forecast just for those products? So I think you can import forecasts, can't you, Steve?
Yeah, I was going to say the easiest way to do that, the customers would, is you do it outside of Sage, and then you can import. So it's a simple template, but import that in with our template into the screen. That's always the easiest way if it's quite dynamic.
Yeah, cool, good, because that's what I said. And the other one, the final one was, does WAP sales orders respect contract? Does contract price reflect in WAP sales orders?
Oh, that's a great question.
Funny enough, that's what I said as well.
Yeah, if it doesn't, it should do. So
Yeah,
I need to take that one offline, Chris, and just
yeah,
I've
no,
not
not a problem.